On our anniversary, my husband smiled and handed me divorce papers in front of all our guests. "I'm done pretending," he said. I stayed calm, reached into my purse, and handed him an envelope. He opened it. His face went white, and he whispered, "How did you—" Then his lawyer stood up and said something that made him collapse. "Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin." He asked for a toast. That was my first warning. The second was his smile. It was too wide, too fixed, a performance for the assembled guests rather than an expression directed at me. I stood beside him at the head of the long dining table in our home, the crystal chandelier casting a hard, glittering light over the remains of an expensive meal, our 20th anniversary. The room was filled with the low hum of conversation, the scent of gardenias from the centerpieces, and the sharp, lingering notes of champagne. I wore the emerald silk dress he had chosen, a color he once said complemented my skin. I felt the weight of the pearl necklace against my collarbone. Every detail was perfect, and every perfect detail felt like a stage prop. I had known something was wrong for months, a quiet shift in the atmosphere of our marriage, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Richard had become meticulously courteous, a form of distance more alarming than any argument. He worked later. His phone, which once lay casually on the kitchen counter, now stayed in his pocket or face down on his bedside table. I observed it all. I noted the new passwords, the vague business trips, the way his eyes skimmed over me as if I were a familiar piece of furniture. I said nothing. I continued my routines, the charity board meetings, the gallery openings, the management of our household. I smiled at his colleagues' wives. I played my part. But tonight, the performance had a different texture. My eyes moved across the faces of our friends, our neighbors, Richard's most important business associates. They were all here, a testament to the life we had built. Then I saw a man I did not recognize standing near the archway to the living room. He was in his 50s, wearing a suit that was too formal for a social gathering, and he held a leather portfolio. He did not hold a drink. He watched Richard with the alert patience of a professional waiting for a cue. That was my third warning. Richard tapped his fork against his crystal flute. The sharp ping cut through the laughter and talk. A hush settled over the room. All faces turned toward us. He slipped his arm around my waist, a gesture that felt possessive, not affectionate. His hand was warm through the thin silk of my dress. "Everyone," he began, his voice projecting with the smooth confidence of a man used to commanding boardrooms. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this milestone with Simone and me. 20 years. He paused, allowing a murmur of appreciation to ripple through the guests. 20 years is a significant achievement. It represents commitment, partnership. He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw not love, but a cold, calculated triumph. Simone has been a remarkable wife, gracious, supportive, a perfect hostess. She has kept a beautiful home and been a credit to my career." The words were a eulogy. He was listing my attributes as if reading a resume for a position that was being terminated. My muscles tightened under his grip. I kept my face still, a polite mask of attention. I could feel the gaze of the unfamiliar man by the archway burning into the side of my face. "But life," Richard continued, his tone dipping into a false, somber note, "is about growth, about being true to oneself. And the truth is, I have been pretending for a long time." A collective, almost imperceptible intake of breath filled the pause. I saw Cora, my sister, stiffen in her seat across the table, her glass frozen halfway to her lips. "I can't pretend anymore. This charade, this marriage, it has run its course. It's time for me to live my truth." He released my waist and turned to face me fully. The room was utterly silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and withdrew a long, legal-sized envelope. It was crisp, white, formidable. He held it out to me. "This is my anniversary gift to you, Simone," he said, his voice clear and devoid of any real emotion. "Divorce papers. I've had my lawyer draw everything up. It's clean, simple. I'm being more than generous with the terms. You'll be comfortable." He said it loudly for the benefit of the room, to frame his cruelty as magnanimity. "I'm done pretending." The envelope hovered between us. The man by the archway, his lawyer, gave a slight, professional nod. Richard's expression was one of expectation. He was waiting for the collapse. He anticipated tears, perhaps a choked protest, a public disintegration that would justify his narrative of liberation. He expected the poised, supportive Simone to shatter into a humiliated, middle-aged woman in front of everyone who defined our social world. I looked from the envelope to his face. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. I saw a flicker of impatience in his eyes. He wanted his dramatic climax. I did not move to take the papers. Instead, I let my gaze travel slowly over the stunned faces of our guests. I saw pity, shock, voyeuristic fascination. I saw Cora's eyes glistening with furious tears. I saw the satisfied set of Richard's lawyer's mouth. Then I looked back at my husband. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me, a sensation I had been cultivating in secret for over a year. The fear, the dread, the sorrow, they were still there, but they were locked away in a distant room. What remained in the forefront was a sharp, focused calm. "Is that all?" I asked. My voice did not shake. It was quiet, but it carried in the dead quiet of the room. Richard blinked. He had not prepared for this response. The script was faltering. "It's everything," he said, thrusting the envelope slightly closer. "Just sign. Don't make this ugly." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. It held no warmth. "You're concerned about things becoming ugly," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. I finally moved. I did not reach for his envelope. Instead, I bent slightly and retrieved my evening clutch from the empty chair beside me. The beaded fabric was cool under my fingertips. I unclasped it with deliberate, unhurried movements. Richard watched, confusion now mingling with his impatience. The guests were statues. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a second envelope. It was thicker than his, a bulky manila packet. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling its substantial weight. Then I extended my arm, offering it to him. "My gift to you, Richard," I said, using the same formal, public tone he had employed. "A counter-proposal." His eyes dropped to the envelope. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by wary confusion. "What is this?" "Open it," I said, my arm still extended. "The terms are also quite clear. I think you'll find them definitive." He hesitated. The power in the room, which had flowed so decisively toward him moments before, now stuttered and stalled. He had to take it. To refuse would make him look weak, uncertain in front of his audience. Slowly, he withdrew his own envelope and took mine. The exchange was complete. His was light, containing only the destructive intent. Mine was heavy, containing the result of 14 months of meticulous, silent work. He fumbled with the metal clasp, his fingers less steady than they had been. He pulled out a sheaf of papers. The top page was a formal legal document, but beneath it were other papers. Spreadsheets, bank statements, photocopies of checks, printed photographs. His eyes scanned the first lines. I watched the color drain from his face. It left his skin a sickly, sallow shade. His jaw went slack. His hands began to tremble, causing the papers to rustle softly, the only sound in the vast, silent room. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The performance was over. The mask of the triumphant liberator was gone. In its place was the raw face of a man who has just realized, too late, that he has profoundly miscalculated. "What have you done?" he whispered. The question meant only for me, but it spilled into the quiet and was heard by the first few rows of guests. I did not answer him immediately. I turned my attention to the unfamiliar man by the archway, who was now frowning, sensing the shift. Then I looked past him, to the corner of the dining room where a woman in a simple, elegant black suit had been seated quietly all evening. She had spoken to no one. She had merely observed. At my slight nod, she rose from her chair. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor as she walked toward us. Every head turned to follow her progress. She stopped beside me, facing Richard and the frozen assembly. Her posture was straight, her expression composed and sharp. Richard's lawyer took an instinctive step forward, but the woman in black held up a hand, a gesture of quiet authority that stopped him. "My name," she said, her voice cool and precise, "is Evelyn Pierce. I am Mrs. Banks Thorne's attorney." She let that title, the hyphenated name that legally bound us, hang in the air for a moment. Then she looked directly at Richard, who was still clutching the damning papers. "The prenuptial agreement you believed was void, Mr. Thorne, due to the passage of time and commingling of assets, was legally reaffirmed by your signature on an amendment last year. You signed it, thinking it was a routine portfolio reallocation document, a regrettable lack of attention to detail. Under its terms, given the circumstances of marital dissolution I have just documented in that file, you are entitled to precisely nothing from the marital estate. In fact, you may find yourself liable for considerable debts." The gasp that filled the room this time was not a quiet one. It was a wave of shock that broke the silence completely, followed by a burst of frantic whispering. Richard did not hear it. He was staring at me, the papers shaking violently in his hands. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. The triumphant annihilator had been annihilated, and the party was just beginning. The wave of noise that followed Evelyn's statement crested and broke into a chaos of murmured questions and startled exclamations. I did not look at the guests. My attention remained fixed on Richard. The tremor in his hands had traveled up his arms to his shoulders. He stared at the papers he held as if they were written in a language he could not decipher. His lawyer, the man by the archway whose name I would later learn was Peterson, finally moved, striding across the room with a stiff, urgent gait. "What is the meaning of this?" Peterson demanded, his voice attempting authority but landing on bluster. He reached for the folder in Richard's hands. Evelyn was faster. She placed a hand on the file, not grabbing but applying enough pressure to stop him. "These are disclosed materials for our client's forthcoming petition," she said, her tone conversational yet carrying. "You will receive formal copies, of course. This was merely a preview for Mr. Thorne." Richard found his voice, though it was a fractured thing, nothing like the confident baritone from his toast. "This is impossible." He looked from the papers to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. You can't do this. That amendment, I didn't know." "You signed it," I said, my voice still low but clear. "On the 15th of June last year, in your study. You said you were late for a meeting with the venture capital group from Austin. You initialed each page and signed the last without reading it. I handed you the pen." I remembered the exact shade of his tie that day, a navy blue with thin gray stripes. I remembered the impatient tap of his finger on the desk. The memory was a clean, sharp fact in my mind. "You tricked me," he whispered, the accusation meant to be venomous but emerging as a plea. "I presented you with a document," I corrected him. "You chose not to review it. A businessman of your stature. I assumed you understood everything you signed." I let the implication hang there. His carelessness, his arrogance was his own. Peterson tried to regain control. Any agreement signed under deceptive circumstances is potentially voidable. We will challenge this. Evelyn gave a small, dismissive nod. "You are welcome to try, Mr. Peterson. The document is notarized. The notary's affidavit and a copy of the security camera footage from the hallway outside the study, which shows Mrs. Banks Thorne leaving the room immediately after you entered for the signing, are included in that file. There were no subsequent discussions or communications about the document's contents. It will hold." She turned her head slightly toward me. "Simone, I believe we are finished here." The finality in her words acted as a signal. The spell of shocked fascination broke into a louder buzz of conversation. Cora was already on her feet, weaving through the chairs toward me, her expression one of fierce vindication. Other faces showed a rapid recalculation. Where moments ago they had viewed me with pity, they now regarded me with a new, cautious curiosity. Richard seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. The performance was over, and he had been the only one on stage who didn't know his lines. He took a step toward me, his voice dropping to a harsh, private snarl. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been planning this treachery?" I met his gaze. The anger I felt was a cold, solid block in my chest, but it did not reach my eyes. "You started planning your exit the first time you lied about working late and came home smelling of another woman's perfume. 2 years and 4 months ago, Richard, I simply decided to plan a better one." His face paled further. He had believed his indiscretions were hidden, that I was too wrapped up in my domestic world to notice. He had mistaken my silence for ignorance. Peterson placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm. "Richard, not here. We need to confer, privately." But Richard shook him off, his focus locked on me. "You'll ruin me. Is that what you want? After everything I've given you?" It was the wrong thing to say. It was the thing he had always said. A familiar, weary anger, old and settled, stirred beneath my calm. "You have given me a role to play for 20 years, I said, my voice even. "You have given me the responsibility of maintaining a facade. You have given me lies and disrespect in my own home. What is in that envelope is not me ruining you. It is the natural consequence of your own choices. The financial records of the offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the one you opened 12 months ago, are particularly illuminating, as are the receipts for the jewelry purchased for your associate, Miss Hartley. They are all listed as business expenses. The IRS may find that an interesting interpretation." The last of the color drained from his face. The offshore account had been his secret insurance policy, his getaway fund, the gifts for his mistress, discreetly buried in corporate accounts. He had been so careful, or so he thought. Cora reached my side, slipping her arm through mine. She said nothing, just held on, a solid anchor. Evelyn moved to my other side, a protective flank. "We should go," Evelyn said, not to me, but announcing it to the room. "The atmosphere has become uncivil." I took one last look at the dining room, at the beautiful ruined party, at the man who was my husband, now looking hollowed out and old under the bright chandelier light. I felt no triumph, not yet, only a profound and weary certainty. I turned, and with Cora on one side and Evelyn on the other, I walked away from the table. The guests parted to let us pass, a silent gauntlet of wide eyes and closed mouths. I did not look back. I walked through the living room, past the grand piano that nobody played, and into the marble-floored foyer. My coat, a simple cashmere wrap, was lying neatly across a bench where I had placed it earlier, anticipating I might need it. I had not anticipated needing it quite like this. I picked it up. Evelyn opened the front door, and the cool night air rushed in, a shocking, clean contrast to the stifling, perfumed warmth of the house. A black sedan was idling at the curb, precisely as Evelyn had arranged. We descended the steps, the three of us. I did not look up at the windows of the house I had lived in for 15 years. I slid into the back seat, Cora following. Evelyn took the front passenger seat and nodded to the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, I finally let my shoulders relax just a fraction. I stared out the window at the familiar tree-lined street blurring past. The house, with all its contained drama, disappeared behind us. Cora squeezed my hand. "My God, Simone," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "What was in that envelope?" I leaned my head back against the leather seat. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, vibrating fatigue in its wake. "Proof," I said, closing my eyes. 14 months of proof, and the key to my exit. The car moved smoothly through the night, carrying me away from the past and into a future I had built, page by secret page, in the quiet hours when I was supposed to be just a wife. The car moved through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, putting distance between me and the life I had just ended. The silence inside the vehicle was not empty, it was thick with unasked questions. Cora held my hand, her grip tight. Evelyn stared straight ahead, her profile sharp in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. "Where are we going?" Cora finally asked, her voice hushed. "My apartment," I said. The words felt foreign and right on my tongue. Cora turned to me, confusion overriding her earlier vindication. "Your apartment? Since when do you have an apartment?" "Since the 1st of last month," I replied, watching the city lights grow denser as we left the suburban enclave behind. "A lease, 6 months, paid in advance. It's in a secure building, my name only." The simplicity of the statement seemed to astound her. She had known I was unhappy, known Richard was distant, but she had not known about the concrete steps. No one had. "You've been planning this for a year," she stated, echoing my earlier words to Richard. 14 months, Evelyn corrected from the front seat without turning around. Her voice was matter of fact. "Simone contacted me 14 months ago. We began a strategy session the following week. But the papers, the things you said to him, the offshore account?" Cora's questions tumbled out. "How could you possibly know all that?" I looked out the window. I paid attention. When he stopped talking to me, he started becoming careless. He left his secondary laptop unlocked one evening. The password was the name of his college fraternity and his graduation year. He never thought I would touch it. I remembered the cool feel of the keys under my fingertips, the quick, frantic pulse in my throat as I copied files to an encrypted drive I had purchased for cash. The offshore account was mentioned in an email thread with his financial advisor. They discussed it as a tax-efficient vehicle. The receipts for the jewelry were in a folder labeled Client Gifts, Q3. He's not a subtle man. He just believed I wasn't looking. The car turned into the underground parking garage of a modern, mid-rise building. The driver navigated to a reserved spot. Evelyn turned in her seat to look at me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. We exited the car and took the private elevator to the 9th floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in a neutral gray. I walked to door 904, inserted a key, and pushed it open. The apartment was not large, but it was bright and clean. The walls were white. A large window offered a view of the city skyline. There was a comfortable-looking sofa, a bookshelf holding a few familiar volumes I had smuggled out over time, and a small dining table. A single suitcase stood in the corner. It contained the essentials I would need for a week: clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. Everything else, the curated life from the house, could stay there or be dealt with later. This space was mine. It held no history of us. Cora walked in, spinning slowly. It's lovely, Simone, but it's so empty. It's full of potential," Evelyn said, closing the door behind us. She placed her briefcase on the table. "And it's legally untouchable. The lease is airtight. Richard cannot claim any interest in it." I moved to the small kitchenette and filled a kettle. The ordinary action, clicking the stove on, taking down 3 mugs, grounded me. "Would you like tea?" I asked. They both nodded. We sat at the table. The kettle whistled. I poured the hot water over the tea bags, the steam warming my face. The familiar ritual in an unfamiliar place created a strange sense of peace. "What happens now?" Cora asked, blowing on her tea. Evelyn opened her briefcase and withdrew a slim folder. "Now, we execute phase 2. Richard and his lawyer are, at this moment, in a state of panic. They will spend tonight and tomorrow scrambling to understand the documents Simone handed him. They will realize the prenuptial amendment is valid. They will see the evidence of hidden assets and infidelity. By tomorrow afternoon, Peterson will call me." "And what will you tell him?" I asked, though I knew the answer. We had rehearsed this. I will tell him that we are prepared to file a motion for an emergency hearing. We will request a temporary restraining order, freezing all marital assets, including the business accounts where he has been funneling money. We will also file a petition for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct, citing the evidence in our possession. Our terms will be non-negotiable. Evelyn's voice was calm, procedural. We hold all the leverage. He breached the reaffirmed prenuptial agreement by attempting to hide assets. He gets nothing. Cora shook her head in amazement. He thought he was so smart. He thought he was handing you a tragedy. He was handing me an opportunity, I said, sipping my tea. The warmth spread through my chest. He wanted a public spectacle. He got one. But he was not the director. I was. Every move he made in the last 2 years, I cataloged. Every lie I documented. I waited. I knew his ego would demand a grand, humiliating finale. I simply made sure I had written a better ending. My phone, which had been on silent, began to vibrate on the table. The screen lit up. Richard. We all looked at it. It buzzed insistently, a tiny, angry insect on the wood. He's calling, Cora whispered, as if he could hear us. Let him, I said. I watched the screen until the call went to voicemail. A notification popped up immediately indicating a new message. Then the phone buzzed again, and again. He's panicking, Evelyn observed. Good, it will cloud his judgment. I picked up the phone. I did not answer. Instead, I opened the settings. I blocked his number. Then, methodically, I blocked the numbers for his office, his car phone, and his lawyer. The silence that followed was absolute. There, I said, placing the phone back down. The first night of the rest of my life. And he gets to spend it alone, in that big, empty house, wondering how the woman he thought he owned managed to quietly build a cage around him with the very lies he told. I looked at my sister and my friend. This isn't about hatred. It's about accountability, and I will see him held accountable for every single choice. The silence after blocking Richard's number was not just an absence of sound. It was an active, deliberate peace. I had constructed it. Cora stayed with me that first night, sleeping on the sofa under a blanket I took from the linen closet. Evelyn left with a firm promise to call first thing in the morning. I lay in the unfamiliar bed in the dark, listening to the muted sounds of the city, a distant siren, the hum of traffic 9 stories below. I did not cry. I replayed the evening in my mind, not with emotion, but with analysis. Had I missed a step? Had my delivery been effective? I concluded it had. Then I slept, a deep, dreamless sleep, for the first time in years. The morning light was bright and unfiltered by heavy drapes. I woke at 6, a habit ingrained from 2 decades of managing a household. For a moment, disorientation held me. The ceiling was wrong, the quality of the light was different. Then memory settled, a solid, welcome weight. I got up. In the kitchen, I made coffee in a simple French press I had bought for the apartment. The ritual was mine. I did not have to consider how Richard preferred his brew. The smell filled the small space. Cora stirred on the sofa, sitting up and blinking. "You're awake," she said, her voice groggy. "I'm making coffee," I said. "There's only 1 mug, so you can use a glass." She joined me, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. We sat at the table as the city woke up outside the window. The normalcy of the moment was profound. "What will you do today?" she asked. "I will wait for Evelyn's call," I said. "Then I will go to the bank. I opened a new account 2 months ago. I need to transfer some funds from the joint account into it before Richard attempts to freeze everything. The law is on my side, but speed is practical." Cora looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've thought of everything." "I tried to," I said. "For a long time, thinking was all I could do. Then I started acting." I sipped my coffee. After my mother died, I realized I had no safety net. My identity was Richard's wife. My credit was tied to his. My social circle was his. I had let myself become a dependent. I decided that would never happen again. The planning began as a form of mental self-defense. It became a blueprint. My phone, now only connected to a handful of people, buzzed at 8:15 a.m. It was Evelyn. "Peterson called my office line at 7:45, she said, her voice crisp, even through the speaker. "He is, as predicted, agitated. He wants to meet. He claims there are misunderstandings about the amendment." "There are no misunderstandings," I said. "He failed to read a contract. Tell him we are willing to meet this afternoon at your office. My terms. You will send him a list of our immediate demands prior to the meeting. He can come prepared to agree, or we file the motion for the emergency hearing by 5 p.m. "Exactly," Evelyn said. "I've already drafted the demands. I'll email you a copy. The key points are immediate exclusive possession of the marital home for you, a temporary injunction preventing him from dissipating any marital assets, and a requirement that he pay all joint marital debts and your attorney's fees pending final settlement. Based on the prenuptial amendment, the final settlement is already dictated, but this establishes control." "Send it," I said. "I'll review it before I go to the bank." I ended the call. Cora was watching me, her coffee forgotten. It's like listening to a general plan a campaign. "It is a campaign," I said. "The first battle was last night. The war is the legal process. I intend to win it decisively." An hour later, I was at the bank. I met with the manager, a woman named Ms. Ruiz, with whom I had quietly opened the independent account. I presented the joint account statements and the copy of the prenuptial amendment Evelyn had prepared for such purposes. "As you can see," I said, my voice calm and professional, "the agreement designates all funds deposited from my independent trust, which is my inheritance from my mother, as my separate property. A significant portion of the balance in the joint account originated from those deposits over the past 5 years. I would like to transfer those funds, which total approximately $280,000, to my individual account immediately." Ms. Ruiz reviewed the documents. She asked a few clarifying questions. The process took 90 minutes. When I left the bank, the money was secure in an account with only my name on it. It was not about wealth. It was about oxygen. I could breathe. Back at the apartment, I reviewed Evelyn's email. The demands were thorough and aggressive. They were designed to shock Peterson and Richard into compliance. I approved them with a single word: proceed. The afternoon passed with a strange, suspended quality. I unpacked my suitcase. I bought groceries at a small market down the street. I made a simple lunch. Each action felt intentional and free. I was building a routine from scratch, and I owned every part of it. At 3 p.m., Evelyn called again. "The meeting is set for 4. Peterson tried to negotiate the location. I refused. He has received our demands." His tone was subdued. "I believe they are beginning to understand the reality of their position." "Good," I said. "Call me after." I did not pace. I sat by the window with a book, though I did not read the words. I watched the clouds move across the sky. I thought about the early years, when Richard's smile was genuine, when he would ask for my opinion on his business ideas. The betrayal was not just of our marriage, but of the partnership I believed we had. He had reduced me to a function. I had reclaimed myself as a force. Evelyn's call came at 5:45. "It's done," she said. There was a faint note of satisfaction in her voice. "They agreed to all temporary terms. Richard will vacate the house by the end of the week. He is staying at a hotel. The injunction is being drafted now. He did not say a single word during the entire meeting. He just stared at the table." Peterson did all the talking, and it was the talk of someone trying to minimize a catastrophe. I absorbed the information. And the next step? "We file the formal petition for divorce tomorrow. We attach the evidence. The court process will move quickly now. He has no defensible position. The amended prenuptial agreement is the lock. Our evidence is the key." I thanked her and ended the call. Dusk was settling over the city. Cora had gone home to her family, promising to return the next day. I was alone, truly alone. for the first time. The quiet of the apartment was no longer strange. It was mine. I had taken the humiliation he had so publicly intended for me and had transformed it in less than 24 hours into his retreat and my advance. The anger was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was no longer a poison. It was fuel, and I had just begun to burn it. The secure storage unit was climate-controlled and smelled of clean concrete and cardboard. I stood in the center of the 10 by 10 space, a single bulb overhead illuminating stacks of labeled plastic bins. Evelyn was with me, her presence a silent testament to the work we had done. Today was for inventory, for transforming suspicion into a documented timeline. "Start from the beginning," Evelyn said, her voice echoing slightly in the small room. "The first entry." I walked to the bin marked Financial Year 1 and 2. I lifted the lid. Inside were not just bank statements, but my own handwritten ledgers. "The beginning was a feeling," I said, my tone analytical. "A shift, but I needed data. So I started keeping a personal ledger, not of our joint finances, but of discrepancies." I pulled out a black cloth-bound notebook. I opened it to the first page. The date was from 26 months ago. Entry 1. R claimed weekend conference in Denver. Flight confirmation email left on printer showed return flight on Sunday. Credit card charge appeared on joint statement for the Laurent Hotel on Saturday night. The Laurent is in Chicago. I looked at Evelyn. It was a small thing, possibly an error, but it was a data point. I turned several pages. Entry 17. Withdrew $5,000 from home equity line, citing office renovations. Contractor invoice provided was dated 6 months prior. Asked about discrepancy. Response was anger, deflection. Topic dropped. I closed the book. The anger was new. It was a tool to shut down inquiry. I noted it. Evelyn nodded, taking another ledger from the bin. "You documented the financial sleight of hand." "I documented everything," I said. I moved to another bin, this one marked Communications and Devices. Inside were printouts and a small locked metal box. After the Denver-Chicago inconsistency, I knew I could not rely on what he told me. I needed independent verification. I never touched his primary phone, but he had an old tablet he used for reading news. He forgot it on the kitchen counter one morning. It was still logged into his email. I paused, remembering the cold thrill of fear and purpose that had shot through me that day. I didn't scroll through his messages. That would have been too risky, too emotional. I created a separate email account for myself. I forwarded every email that had a financial attachment, bank statements, investment summaries, wire confirmations, from his inbox to that account. Then I deleted the sent messages from his sent folder. It took 12 minutes. He never noticed. "That's how you found the Cayman Island Trust," Evelyn stated. "Yes." The initial correspondence was about estate planning diversification. Later emails were more explicit. They discussed shielding assets and maintaining privacy. The lawyer was offshore. The bank was offshore. Richard was moving money he claimed was reinvested in the business. I opened the metal box. It contained a single encrypted flash drive. All the forwarded emails and the files I later copied from his laptop are on here. I made 2 copies, one for you, one kept in a safe deposit box under my mother's name. Evelyn took the drive, handling it with the respect it deserved. It was a weapon. And the personal infidelity, the Miss Hartley? A third bin, this one unmarked. I opened it. Here, the evidence was less digital, more human. Printed photographs taken from a distance, showing Richard and a younger woman entering a hotel, laughing. Receipts for gifts. A bracelet from a jeweler I knew was not one he used for business. A screenshot taken from a social media page I accessed through a dummy account of the same woman wearing that bracelet. Lydia Hartley, a junior partner at his firm. He hired her 18 months ago. Their first business trip together was to Miami 9 months later. The perfume I smelled on him when he returned was black orchid. It is not a scent I have ever owned. My voice was flat, reciting facts. I hired a discreet investigator 6 months ago, just for confirmation. I needed to know if it was a single affair or a pattern. The investigator confirmed it was Miss Hartley and that it was ongoing. He also provided the photographs and confirmed the hotel receipts. I did not want to know more details. I only needed proof of the fact. Evelyn looked around the storage unit, at the bins containing the ruins of my marriage, meticulously catalogued. This is more than proof. This is a narrative, a story of systematic deception. That was the point, I said, closing the lid of the unmarked bin. I knew that when the end came, he would try to control the story. He would paint me as the dependent wife who hadn't evolved, who didn't understand his needs. He would paint himself as the long-suffering husband seeking freedom. I needed my own story, one built on documents, dates, and financial trails, one that showed not a victim, but a witness, a forensic accountant of my own life. I walked to the final bin, the smallest one. It was marked Personal Exit Strategy. Inside were the deeds to the safe deposit box, the lease for my apartment, the paperwork for my new bank account, and the certified copy of the prenuptial amendment. The amendment was the masterstroke, Evelyn said, getting him to sign it. It required patience, I admitted. I had the document drafted by a lawyer you recommended, under a corporate alias. I waited for the right moment. He was preoccupied with a major deal, stressed about liquidity. I presented the amendment to him as a routine estate streamlining measure, consolidating some old trusts. I told him his lawyer had already reviewed it. He trusted me to handle such things. He was in a hurry. He signed. I looked at the document, at his flamboyant, confident signature. His arrogance was his signature, literally. We locked the storage unit. The past was neatly contained behind a steel door. In the car, Evelyn broke the silence. Most clients in your situation are emotional wrecks. They react. You constructed a parallel reality beside your marriage for over a year. I watched the city pass by. The emotion was there. It is still there. But I channeled it into organization. Every time I felt sadness, I filed a document. Every time I felt anger, I cross-referenced a financial statement. The ledgers were my therapy. They transformed chaotic pain into structured strategy. I turned to her. He took away my present, so I focused on securing my future. It was that simple. And it was. The complexity was in the details, but the motive was elemental. Survival. The woman who had smiled graciously at dinner parties had been running a full-time intelligence operation from her own home, and now the operation was entering its final public phase. The ledgers would speak, and they would say everything I had chosen not to. The formal petition for divorce was filed by Evelyn's office at 9:05 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was not a simple document. It was a bound volume, over 80 pages long, containing the petition itself, the reaffirmed prenuptial agreement, and a curated selection of exhibits from the storage unit. It was delivered by process server to Richard's office, to his hotel, and to his lawyer, Peterson. The legal machinery I had designed was now in motion, and its first effect was to generate a specific kind of silence on the other side. A silence born of shock, then of frantic, disorganized activity. Evelyn relayed the initial reactions to me in her office later that day. Peterson called me 40 minutes after receiving the service, she said, leaning back in her chair. He was no longer subdued. He was angry. He accused us of legal treachery and character assassination. He demanded we retract the filing and enter good faith negotiations. I listened, my hands folded in my lap. And your response? I read him the relevant clause from the prenuptial amendment, the one about automatic forfeiture of all marital assets in the event of hidden accounts or adulterous conduct. Then I asked him which part of the clause he wished to discuss first. He hung up. A satisfied silence settled between us. What will he do? I asked. He will scramble, Evelyn said. He will advise Richard to comply with the temporary orders to avoid immediate contempt charges. He will then try to find a weakness in our documentation. He will fail. The Cayman account is the most damaging. Attempting to hide marital assets is the one thing that makes judges genuinely furious. It shows contempt for the court itself. I learned of Richard's personal reactions through indirect channels. Cora heard from a mutual acquaintance that Richard had been seen at a downtown bar alone in the middle of a weekday afternoon. My former housekeeper, Maria, whom I had insured received a generous severance and a letter of recommendation, called me cautiously. Mrs. Thorne. Simone, she corrected herself. He came to the house yesterday to get more clothes. He was not himself. He was shouting on the phone. He threw a vase in the foyer. I cleaned it up. He did not apologize. Her voice was heavy with disapproval. He asked me if I knew where you were. I told him I did not. That was the truth. Thank you, Maria, I said. You don't have to go back. The temporary order gives me possession. If he returns, you can call the police. I will not go back, she said firmly. He is a man with a broken temper. It is not safe. The next development was financial. Evelyn received a notice from the court that Richard, through Peterson, had filed a motion to dismiss the petition based on fraudulent inducement regarding the prenuptial amendment. It was the expected, desperate move. He's claiming you tricked him into signing, Evelyn explained, her tone dismissive. He's submitted an affidavit saying he was under duress, preoccupied with a business deal, and that you misrepresented the document's contents. And our response? I asked. We have the notary affidavit stating he appeared of sound mind and under no duress. We have the security footage timestamp. And we have a copy of the email he sent to his golf partner 30 minutes before the signing, discussing his golf handicap, not the actions of a man under acute distress. She allowed a thin smile. We also have the testimony of the process server who delivered the amendment to his office a full week before he signed it. Peterson's own paralegal signed for it. They had constructive notice. The motion will be denied. The denial came 3 days later. The judge's order was succinct. It stated that Mr. Thorne, a sophisticated businessman, had failed to exercise due diligence and that no evidence of fraud had been presented. The prenuptial agreement stood. The petition would proceed. This legal setback triggered the next phase of Richard's desperation. He began trying to reach me through intermediaries. Flowers were delivered to my apartment building, elaborate, expensive arrangements. The front desk, following my instructions, refused them. Cards arrived, handwritten notes pleading for a conversation, for clarity. I did not open them. I had the front desk discard them. Then the calls started to come to Cora. She told me about them, her voice irritated. He called me last night. He sounded pathetic. He said he needed to understand what Simone wants. He said he's willing to be reasonable. He asked me to intervene. What did you say? I asked. I told him what he wanted was irrelevant now. The courts would decide, and I told him to stop calling me. She paused. He started to say something about how he always cared for me, for us, as a family. I hung up. The most telling sign of his unraveling came from the business. Evelyn monitored the business filings. She discovered that Richard had taken a sudden large loan against his share of the firm. The paperwork listed the reason as liquidity restructuring. He's trying to generate cash, Evelyn told me, pointing to the financial statement on her desk, probably to fund his legal fight or to try to move assets somewhere else before the court's injunction fully locks everything down. It's a risky move. His partners won't be pleased. They rely on stability. Can he do that? I asked. The injunction prevents him from dissipating marital assets. This loan is against a business that is partially a marital asset. It's a gray area, but it shows panic. He's creating liabilities, not preserving value. It's the action of a cornered man. I considered this, his world, The carefully constructed edifice of success, control, and image was developing cracks. The public humiliation he had intended for me was now his private reality, magnified by financial and legal pressure. He was in the hotel room, I was in my apartment. He was reacting, I was still acting. "What is our next move?" I asked Evelyn. "We wait for the discovery phase. He will be compelled to produce financial documents under oath. He will have to explain the Cayman account. He will have to account for every transfer, every business expense that was a gift for his mistress. The pressure will become unbearable. He will either break and settle on our terms, or he will lie under oath and face perjury." She closed the folder. "His desperation is his own doing. We are merely the mechanism of consequence." I left her office. The city outside was normal, busy. People went about their days. I thought of Richard, shouting in an empty house, signing loan papers in a panic, being hung up on by his own sister-in-law. This was not the dramatic, explosive revenge of fiction. It was a slow, methodical tightening, a collapsing of walls he himself had built. And from my quiet apartment, with my ledgers and my lawyer, I could hear the distant rumble of the collapse. It was the sound of accountability, and I found I had no desire to stop it. Evelyn's call came early, her voice holding a new, sharp edge. A reporter from the business section of the Chronicle called the office. They're asking for comment on Richard Thorne's divorce proceedings and allegations of hidden assets. I was in my apartment sorting through a box of my mother's books that Cora had brought over. I placed a volume on the shelf. How did they get the information? The court file is public. Someone tipped them off to look. Probably Peterson trying to shape the narrative first, or one of Richard's disgruntled business partners seeing an opportunity. She paused. This changes the calculus. It's no longer a private legal matter. It's becoming a story. "What is our comment?" I asked, my voice steady. "No comment," Evelyn said. "Silence is the correct strategy. Anything we say can be twisted. The facts in the petition are stark enough. They will speak for themselves. But you should be prepared. Your name will be out there. His name will be associated with financial misconduct. The scrutiny will be intense." I thanked her and ended the call. I walked to the large window in my living room. The city below was oblivious. I felt no anxiety, only a heightened awareness. The war had entered a new theater, the court of public opinion. Richard cared deeply about that court. I did not, but I could use his care against him. By that afternoon, the first article appeared online. Cora texted me the link. The headline was cautious but clear. "Prominent local investor faces allegations of asset concealment in divorce." The article summarized the petition's claims, citing the Cayman Island Trust and the reaffirmed prenuptial agreement. It named Richard and, briefly, me. It quoted a source close to the proceedings, saying the case involved serious allegations of financial impropriety. It did not quote Peterson or Richard. They had likely declined to comment. I read it once, then closed the browser. The facts were presented accurately. That was all that mattered. The effect was immediate, but not on me. Evelyn called again 2 hours later. "Peterson is furious. He claims we leaked it." I informed him we did not, and that his own motion to dismiss brought additional attention to the case file. He sputtered and hung up. "Richard has left me 3 voicemails demanding I get the story retracted. He sounds unhinged." "Let him be unhinged," I said. "His reaction will only convince the reporter there's more to the story." The next day, a follow-up piece was published. This one had done more digging. It mentioned Richard's firm, Thorne Capital. It named Lydia Hartley as a junior partner, noting she had accompanied him on several business trips. The connection was not stated explicitly, but it was heavily implied. The article also mentioned the sudden loan Richard had taken against his partnership share, questioning the firm's financial stability. This time, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a different reporter, from a gossip columnist at a local magazine. They wanted my side of the story. I deleted the message. Cora came over that evening, her face alight with a fierce energy. Have you seen the comments? On the business article? People are calling him a fraud. Someone who claims to be a former employee said he always played fast and loose with expenses. I haven't looked, I said, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. It doesn't change my strategy. But it changes his, Cora insisted. His reputation is his currency. You're devaluing it by the hour. That was precisely the point. The legal case would strip his assets. The public case was stripping his armor. The charming, successful facade was cracking under the light of scrutiny. 3 days after the first article, Evelyn served the next legal volley, a formal motion to compel discovery. It was a routine step, but she drafted it with surgical precision. It demanded Richard produce, within 14 days, complete records for the Cayman account, all communications with the offshore trustee, all credit card statements for the past 3 years, and his passport travel logs. The motion noted his delay and obfuscation to date and requested the court impose sanctions if he failed to comply. This document was also filed publicly. A new article appeared, this one focusing on the bitter and high-stakes divorce, detailing the legal back and forth. It included a bland statement from Peterson. My client denies all allegations and is confident the truth will prevail. It included no statement from us. The contrast was telling, one side protesting, the other side silent and procedural. Then the business consequences began. Evelyn forwarded me an email from one of her contacts. A major pension fund, a client of Thorn Capital, had put a pending investment on administrative hold, citing negative publicity and operational uncertainty. Another of Richard's partners, a man named Davies, had been quoted in an industry newsletter saying the firm was reviewing its governance structures. Richard's panic was now metastasizing into professional catastrophe. He was being isolated. I received a registered letter at my apartment. It was from Peterson. It was a formal settlement offer. The terms were a fraction of what the prenuptial agreement entitled me to, but significantly more than the nothing he had originally intended. It was a white flag, waved from a burning ship. I took the letter to Evelyn's office. She read it, then looked at me over her glasses. He's trying to stop the bleeding. The publicity is hurting the business. He needs this to go away. We do not accept, I said. The agreement is the agreement. He gets nothing from the marital estate. He pays my legal fees. He settles the tax liabilities on the hidden account. Those are the terms. They are not negotiable. Evelyn smiled, a thin professional curve of her lips. I will draft the rejection. It will be brief. As I left her building, I saw a man with a camera loitering near the entrance. He looked at me, hesitated, then raised his camera. I did not look away. I did not hurry. I met his lens with a calm, expressionless face until he lowered the camera, uncertain. I entered the waiting car Evelyn had ordered. The legal onslaught was not a barrage of noise. It was a series of precise, calibrated actions. Each motion, each filed document, each refusal to engage in his drama was a turn of the screw. The publicity was an unexpected accelerant, burning away the respectability he hid behind. I watched it from my balcony as one might watch a distant storm. The thunder was the sound of his world coming apart, and I had caused it, not with a scream, but with a signature on a document and the patience to let his own actions bury him. The deposition was scheduled for 10 a.m. in a conference room at Peterson's law firm. Evelyn and I arrived 15 minutes early. The room was large, paneled in dark wood, with a long table that could seat 20. Today, there were only 6 chairs occupied. On one side, Peterson, Richard, and a court reporter with her stenography machine. On the other, Evelyn, me, and a video technician setting up a camera on a tripod. The air was cool, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. Richard looked diminished. His suit was expensive but sat loosely on him, as if he had lost weight quickly. There were shadows under his eyes. He did not look at me when I entered. He stared at the blank legal pad in front of him. Peterson, in contrast, was all strained energy, arranging folders, adjusting his glasses, shooting sharp glances at Evelyn. The court reporter swore me in. I raised my right hand, stated my name, and promised to tell the truth. I sat in the leather chair, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the table. Evelyn sat to my right, a silent pillar. Peterson began. His questions were designed to be aggressive, to rattle me. He started with the prenuptial amendment. Mrs. Thorne, did you or did you not deliberately deceive your husband about the nature of the document he signed on June 15th of last year? No, I said, I did not. You presented it to him as a routine financial document, is that correct? I presented it as an amendment to our existing estate plan. That is what it was. But you did not specifically highlight the clauses reaffirming the original prenuptial agreement's terms, did you? I told him it was an amendment that required his signature. He is an experienced businessman. He is responsible for reading what he signs. Peterson's jaw tightened. He shifted topics to the Cayman account. When did you first become aware of the offshore trust? I first saw references to it in email correspondence forwarded to a secure account on October 12th of last year. And you access these emails without your husband's knowledge or consent? The emails were on a shared household device. I had legitimate access. I made copies for my personal records regarding our joint financial planning. My answers were factual, uninflected. He moved to the personal. You hired a private investigator, is that correct? Yes. To follow your husband? To confirm information relevant to the stability of our marital estate. His conduct with a subordinate employee created potential liability for the business, which is a marital asset. Peterson leaned forward. So you admit to spying on your husband? Evelyn raised a hand. Objection. Characterizing. The witness has answered the question. I'll rephrase, Peterson said, irritated. You directed a third party to surveil your husband's movements without his knowledge. I directed a licensed professional to gather factual information, I said. I did so to protect my financial interests. The questions continued for an hour. Peterson tried to find a crack, a moment of emotional inconsistency. He asked about our early marriage, about my role as a homemaker, attempting to paint a picture of a dependent wife who had turned vindictive. I responded with dates, contributions, and facts. I cited the volunteer work that had built his social network, the management of household finances that had freed his time, the strategic advice I had given during the firm's early struggles, all documented in my ledgers, which Evelyn entered as exhibits. Richard remained silent, his head bowed. He flinched only once when Peterson asked about Lydia Hartley. Did you confront your husband about his relationship with Miss Hartley? No. Why not? Confrontation is not a strategic tool. I needed evidence, not a confession. Peterson, frustrated, finally turned the floor over to Evelyn for cross-examination. This was the part we had planned. Evelyn stood, not to pace, but to command the room from her place. Her questions were not for me. They were statements for the record, using me as the conduit. Mrs. Thorne, you have identified Exhibit 12, a series of bank transfers from the joint money market account to an entity called Horizon Ventures, LLC. Correct? Yes. And what did you discover Horizon Ventures, LLC to be? A shell company registered in Delaware. Its sole bank account received transfers from our joint account and subsequently transferred funds to the Cayman Island Trust. Did your husband ever discuss Horizon Ventures, LLC with you as an investment? No. Did he list it on any financial disclosure provided to you during your marriage? No. Evelyn moved through the evidence like a guide through a museum of betrayal, the jewelry receipts, the hotel bookings, the loan against the partnership taken after the injunction was filed. Each time she asked, "Was this disclosed to you?" Each time my answer was no. Then she came to the final point. Mrs. Thorne, on the night of your 20th anniversary, your husband served you with divorce papers in front of your friends and colleagues. What was your primary concern in that moment? Peterson shot up. Objection! Calls for speculation. Evelyn was ready. It goes to state of mind and justification for subsequent actions, Your Honor. The judge, via the written rules of deposition, would later rule on the objection, but I was allowed to answer. I looked directly at the camera lens. My primary concern was securing the financial stability I had helped build over 2 decades, which he was actively attempting to conceal and dissipate. My concern was for my future safety and independence. And had you taken steps prior to that night to secure that independence? Yes. I had secured separate housing. I had established separate financial accounts. I had retained counsel. And I had ensured the prenuptial agreement protecting my interests was legally reaffirmed. Why did you not simply file for divorce yourself once you had this information? I paused, ensuring my words were clear. Because I believed he would reveal his intentions in a manner that would establish his motives for the court. I did not have to force the issue. I only had to be prepared for it. He chose the time and the place. I chose the outcome. The room was silent. The stenographer's fingers had stopped for a second before resuming their soft tapping. Evelyn looked at Peterson. Your witness. Peterson had no further questions. He looked drained. Richard had not raised his head throughout my entire cross-examination. His shoulders were hunched as if against a physical weight. The deposition was adjourned. As we gathered our papers, Richard finally spoke, his voice a low rasp aimed at the table. You never loved me at all, did you? It was always about the money. I finished placing the last document into my briefcase. I looked at him, this man I had shared a life with. I felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. You are confusing yourself with me, Richard, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the still room. You are the one who traded our marriage for secrets and a hidden bank account. I simply ensured the ledger was balanced. I turned and followed Evelyn out of the conference room. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing him in with the ruins of his own narrative. My testimony was not an emotional outburst. It was a report. And it was, I knew, the final nail in the coffin of his defense. The truth, spoken calmly and under oath, is a weapon against which bluster and lies have no shield. The settlement conference was scheduled by the judge, a mandatory attempt to avoid trial. It was held in a neutral, beige-walled mediation room at the courthouse. Richard, Peterson, Evelyn, and I sat on opposite sides of a square table. A court-appointed mediator, a weary-looking woman in her 60s, sat at the head. It was a formality. Everyone in the room knew the outcome was predetermined. Peterson spoke first. His aggression had been replaced by a stiff, resigned formality. My client is prepared to offer a lump sum settlement in lieu of the strict terms of the disputed amendment, a significant sum reflecting 20 years of marriage. Evelyn did not look at the proposal he slid across the table. The amendment is not disputed. It was upheld by the court. The terms are not negotiable. Mr. Thorne retains his separate property acquired prior to the marriage. All marital assets, which include the appreciation of his business during the marriage and all funds traced to the hidden accounts, are awarded to Mrs. Thorne Banks. He is responsible for all marital debts and her legal fees. That is the agreement he signed. Richard finally spoke, his voice hollow. You'll leave me with nothing. I looked at him. You left me with nothing on our anniversary. I am simply holding you to your own choice. The difference is, I built a lifeboat first. The mediator reviewed the court file, the deposition transcript, the financial exhibits. She asked Richard a few clarifying questions about his ability to pay the legal fees and debts. His answers were monosyllabic. After an hour, she nodded. Given the binding nature of the valid prenuptial agreement and the evidence of hidden assets, I see no basis for deviation from its terms. My recommendation to the court will be to enforce the agreement as written. Peterson did not argue. He simply closed his briefcase. The fight was gone. The final judgment was entered 1 week later. I was in Evelyn's office when the electronic notification appeared on her screen. She read it aloud, her voice clean and clear in the sunlit room. The marriage is dissolved. The prenuptial agreement, as amended, is enforced in its entirety. Respondent, Richard Thorne, shall transfer to petitioner, Simone Banks Thorne, the following: the marital residence free and clear, 100% of the balance of all jointly titled investment and banking accounts as of the date of filing, and a sum equal to the traced value of the offshore trust, plus penalties and interest assessed by the IRS, to be paid from respondent's separate assets. Respondent is solely responsible for all tax liabilities arising from the concealed assets. Respondent shall pay petitioner's reasonable attorney's fees in the amount of... She named a figure that was substantial, but fair for the work done. All other claims are dismissed with prejudice. It was over. The legal machinery had processed my carefully gathered evidence and delivered the verdict I had engineered. The financial transfers began immediately. The house was deeded to my name alone. The funds from the joint accounts were wired to my independent account. The court ordered Richard to liquidate certain holdings to satisfy the judgment for the offshore funds and the legal fees. Evelyn monitored every transaction. The professional consequences for Richard unfolded separately, as I knew they would. A week after the judgment, a short article appeared in the business section. Thorne Capital Managing Partner departs. It stated that Richard Thorne had resigned to pursue other opportunities. The article briefly mentioned the recent divorce proceedings, but offered no further detail. The silence from the firm was telling. He was not a victim. He was a liability they had quietly removed. I received a final terse email from Peterson, copying Evelyn, stating that all transfers were complete and providing confirmation numbers. He included a PDF of the satisfied judgment. There was no personal message. There was nothing left to say. I went to the house one last time. It was empty. The furniture remained, but the life was gone. I walked through the silent rooms. I felt no attachment, no nostalgia. It was a beautiful shell. I had already arranged for a real estate agent to sell it. The proceeds would go into my investment portfolio, a portfolio I would manage myself. On my way out, I checked the mailbox from habit. Among the circulars was a single, hand-addressed envelope. I recognized Richard's writing. I opened it. It contained no letter, just a photograph, a faded print from over 15 years ago. It was a picture of us on a beach, early in our marriage. We were laughing, squinting in the sun. On the back, he had written a single word: "Why?" I held the picture for a moment, then I tore it in half, then into quarters, and dropped the pieces into a trash can at the curb. The gesture was not angry. It was practical. The past he was clinging to was an illusion. The people in that photograph were gone. He had killed them with his choices. I had buried them with my evidence. I got into my car, a modest, reliable sedan I had purchased with my own money after moving out. I drove back to my apartment. The city felt different now. It was no longer a place where I was defined by my association with someone else. It was simply where I lived. That evening, Evelyn came over for a glass of wine. We sat on my balcony looking at the lights. She handed me a final document, a certified copy of the judgment of dissolution. "It's done," she said. I took the paper. It was just that, paper. But it represented the end of a long, meticulous campaign. "Yes," I said, "it is." "How do you feel?" she asked, her lawyerly detachment allowing a sliver of personal curiosity. I considered the question. I felt tired, but a clean tired. I felt solvent. I felt safe. The cold anger that had fueled me for over a year had burned out, leaving behind a quiet, steady certainty. "I feel," I said, "like the balance of the ledger is finally zero. The accounts are closed." We clinked glasses. The sound was a period at the end of a very long sentence. The revenge was not a moment of dramatic violence. It was a state of achieved justice. It was the silent, permanent shift in the balance of power. He had nothing. I had my life, my freedom, and my security. Checkmate. The sunlight in the new kitchen was different. It was morning light, clear and direct, streaming through the east-facing window above the sink. It fell in a bright rectangle on the pale oak floor of the house I had bought with the settlement proceeds. I stood at the counter, slicing fruit for a bowl. The knife was sharp, the motion routine. The house was not large, but it was mine. It sat on a quiet street with mature trees, a 15-minute drive from the city center. It had a small garden in the back. I had chosen it for the light. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it. Cora stood on the porch, holding a basket of muffins. Evelyn was behind her, carrying a bottle of champagne. It was a Saturday. We had planned a late breakfast, a housewarming of sorts. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Cora bustled in, immediately heading for the kitchen. "It smells amazing in here. What are you making?" "Just an omelet, some fruit." I followed her. Evelyn placed the champagne on the counter and looked around. Her gaze was approving, analytical. "The renovations are complete. It looks settled." "They finished last week," I said. "It was mostly cosmetic, fresh paint, updated the kitchen hardware. The structure was sound." I returned to the omelet, pouring the beaten eggs into the pan. The sizzle was a comfortable sound. We ate at the round table in the breakfast nook. The sunlight warmed our backs. Conversation was easy about inconsequential things. A movie Cora had seen, a difficult case Evelyn had recently won, the book I was reading. There was no mention of Richard, or the divorce, or the anniversary party. That story was archived. This was a new volume. After we ate, Cora cleared the plates. Evelyn opened the champagne, not for a toast, but just to drink. We took our glasses into the living room. The furniture was simple, chosen for comfort, not for show. My mother's books were on the shelves. A few pieces of art I had collected over the years, independent of Richard's taste, hung on the walls. Cora curled up in an armchair. "Do you ever hear from him?" she asked, the question inevitable. She did not say his name. I sat on the sofa, tucking my feet beneath me. Indirectly, through mutual contacts. I heard he moved to another city. He took a position at a smaller firm, a step down. I took a sip of champagne. The bubbles were crisp. I do not seek out the information, but it finds its way. "And how does that make you feel?" Evelyn asked, her tone professional but genuinely curious. I considered the question. I looked around the room at the evidence of my own choices. It makes me feel nothing in particular. His consequences are his to manage. My life is here. I paused. A year ago, I was cataloging his lies in a storage unit. Today, I am thinking about what to plant in the garden. The connection between those two facts is linear, but the distance between them is vast. Cora smiled. "You sound peaceful." "I am occupied," I corrected gently. "Peace is a byproduct of occupation on your own terms. I am running a consulting business from the study upstairs. Small clients, nonprofits mostly, helping them with their fundraising strategies. It uses skills I had let atrophy. It generates an income. It is mine." Evelyn nodded. "You built an exit strategy that became an entrance." That was an accurate summary. The revenge was not the point of arrival. It was the removal of an obstacle. The point of arrival was this quiet Saturday morning in a house that held no ghosts, with friends who required no performance. Later, after Cora and Evelyn had left, I went into the garden with a cup of tea. The afternoon was warm. I knelt on the grass, examining the soil of a flower bed. I pulled a few weeds. The physical work was satisfying. My hands were in the earth, creating something rather than sifting through the digital debris of a broken marriage. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an alert from my investment account. A dividend had been paid. The numbers on the screen represented security, the product of the legal war I had won. I put the phone away. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows. I thought of the envelope I had handed Richard that night. It felt like a gesture from another lifetime. The woman who executed that move had been fueled by a cold, focused fury. That woman was still me, but she was a version of me that had completed her task. She had protected the woman who could now sit in a garden and think about azaleas. There was no grand moment of forgiveness, no release of lingering bitterness. Those emotions had been tools, and I had set them down when the job was done. What remained was a quiet understanding. I had respected myself enough to fight back with precision, not rage. I had honored the partnership I thought we had by holding him accountable for betraying it. As dusk approached, I went inside. I locked the door. I walked through the quiet, clean rooms, turning on a few lamps. The house felt full, not with things, but with potential. I had no need to fill the silence with noise. The silence was mine, and it was comfortable. I stood at the living room window, looking out at the street. The first stars were becoming visible in the deep blue sky. I raised my glass of water in a silent, private gesture. Not a toast to the past and not a curse upon it. A simple acknowledgement of the present. The ledger was balanced. The account was closed. The future, for the first time in a very long time, was simply tomorrow, and I was looking forward to it.